Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
We're most pleased to welcome to our program today the same guest we had last week with two additions. For you who were with us last week, we discussed the trip to Australia and New Zealand by our guest, and they have, as I've indicated, been with us before. Today we're going to talk about New Guinea, and I welcome to the program Steve and Judy Meyer, who, as I indicated, were with us last week. We're happy to welcome as additions this week their two sons, Chris and Andy. Welcome. We're very happy to have you here, and we're excited about talking about this recent trip that you took. And as always, I'm so happy to have on the panel regular panelist Idaho State Senator Mary Lou Reed, who will ask the first series of questions.
Thank you, Tony. You forgot to mention that this is the first time in 18 years that an entire family has been on your show. And I want you all to fill in the blank. A family that travels together, is it laughs together?
Films.
Survives.
Yes.
Enjoys.
That's great. That's great.
That's right.
Judy, why don't you show us where Papua New Guinea is and how you got there?
Okie doke. Lou, to start out, let's just show a world map, us starting from northern United States, and that's about the 45th parallel. Coming down, we first visited New Zealand and Australia, which we talked about last week, and then just north of Australia, just 100 miles from the northernmost point of Australia, is the second largest island continent, and not a continent but an island, called New Guinea. One half of that is called Papua New Guinea, that you just asked about. The other half of New Guinea belongs to Indonesia, and it's called Irian Jaya. On top of that, I'd like to put this map of New Guinea, and this would be just the Papua New Guinea part. This line separates the two countries. To travel to New Guinea, either come by ship or by air, and generally you fly into a port in the capital city called Port Moresby. World War II people recognize this as an important battle in World War II, Guadalcanal. From Port Moresby, I will just give you a quick survey of the map area, and then we'll go on to questions. But the country of New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, has been a country since about 1972. Before that, the history is long of the coastline being explored in the 1500s and reflects the impact of explorers. The inland area, which is very mountainous, and so the roads are not connected from one area to another. The capital of Port Moresby does not have a road traveling into the highlands area. This highlands area has mountains of 7,000 feet, snow on occasion, things you don't think about on a country that's not very far from the equator. And in these high, steep, it's really a land of superlatives. The mountains are very steep, the rivers are very rushing, it is very lush, it is a beautiful country. They are so steep and jagged that really the different peoples that lived here did not communicate with one another over the mountains. And so this part of New Guinea was not explored, nor really even discovered at all by anybody until 1939. And at that time, people were using airplanes for surveillance to try and locate mining areas, and it was Australians primarily who were doing that. And in fact, flew over into these mountains and noticed that there were cultivated patches of land, and decided there really must be somebody in there, even though it was so remote, nobody thought there would be. And so in 1939, the first introduction of white man to the original natives included the introduction of the wheel and the metal tool and some of the other diseases and accoutrements that came with the first contact. So we'll go back to the questions, but this is the geography that we're dealing with in a country that has 700 languages, different kinds of languages. And so your guide cannot necessarily communicate with people down the road very far because it is such a different language and there's no way to know them all.
And why did you choose to go to this rather special, very rugged and clearly primitive place?
Because it is probably the last place, and everything you read says, go now, it is being changed and impacted. This is the time to go, particularly for an anthropological kind of understanding of the area where Margaret Mead did her studies in the 1920s and 30s. Needs to be seen quickly because it is changing. Although the government has an interesting policy of trying to preserve and honor the old style ways, the country is struggling with, do we accept the old and honor it, or we do not and hurry and catch up with the rest of it?
Because the world is certainly coming
Yes.
to
Yes.
New Guinea. Steve, would you like to add anything to why you went, or Andy and Chris?
Well, Judy started off by explaining that we had an airplane ticket, and you know, I think it's an interesting commentary on all of us that with this program of freebie premium tickets when you travel, it becomes a challenge to see how far you can go. It's kind of part of the system when you get these tickets in your hands to see how far you can go, and so one of the reasons we went to Australia and New Zealand was because that's as far as you can go on the airline that we traveled on. And then Judy has been interested in anthropology for a long time, and she started talking to our whole family that if we're as close as Australia, shouldn't we really go to New Guinea? And as it turns out, it was a wonderful idea because it's a marvelous place to visit.
And did you have a family vote here? Did you both decide that this was a good idea?
Well, Lou, we had to decide because my college education expenses are fast arriving and this trip was not cheap. So I sort of decided to go spend the money here and see things while they are today rather than set aside some for the future, but I'm glad I did it.
You weren't sure you'd ever get another chance to go and see it as it is.
Yeah.
And Chris, did you have a special vote on this?
Boy, I had the time and I was glad to go. It was just another family trip that they're always so fun, and we see so many different things together as a family. It's always, I mean, so valuable as a life experience.
Oh, that's very
It was
special.
important to me, Lou, that by the time these men grow up, they will not be able to experience what we did now. And I hope that we have a sense of some of the history and the value of people who do things in a different way and who've not been nearly as impacted as any other place we could think of that we could still be comfortable traveling to. We were very lucky.
And you all kept journals, is that right?
The boys do better at it than we do. But somebody has to make the travel arrangements.
Yeah. I can say that to Mary Lou and our viewers, that I talked to Judy and Steve before they went, and I always have a contract with them that they have to come back and do a program, so I'm sure they were taking notes knowing they were going to do that. I am going to resist my temptation to get right into the governmental instruction, which I always like to do, and I want to talk with your sons for a moment because some of the things that they did were very exciting, and our viewers would be interested for their children maybe having some of the same experiences, and also we don't have this opportunity very often to have the sons or daughters, either one of the families, with us. Andy, I'll start with you. I know that you had your birthday while you were on this trip in New Guinea, and I understand that you had something very different, I guess, birthday dinner than usual.
That's right.
And it's concerning about environment. All I want to have you to justify what you had. Tell us what you had.
Well, that's true, Tony. My birthday was June 27th, and at that time we were spending a week on the Karawari River in New Guinea, and we stayed at a lodge, and the people served us some gourmet food in New Guinea, and it happened to be pretty common there, which was crocodile tail. It was very nice, you know, it tasted delicious, but as you say about the environmental issue, there are plenty of crocodiles in New Guinea. So people go out at night and you can see them slithering around on the banks and splashing in the water, so it isn't really a problem.
You know, they even have farms, don't they? They raise them like we do cattle and so forth.
That's true. You can buy a crocodile meat, I'm sure, in mass quantities if you wanted to serve it in mass quantities.
But that is certainly a birthday you'll never forget, I'm sure.
That's true. Never will.
Were there any other customs, so forth, of how they helped you celebrate your birthday in that country?
That evening, the entertainment at the lodge was a group, and they played guitars. It was a group of natives, and they walked from their village, which was several miles down the river, and they came up to the lodge to play the guitars, and they played a special instrument called the bamboo. That's what they called it. It was a series of pipes of hollow bamboo tubes which they whapped on the end with old sandals that they evidently picked up somewhere, but it made a peculiar bonging sound, which was very nice percussion along with the guitars.
And that they honored you that way with your birthday?
I suppose. I don't know.
I'm sure your family told them it was your birthday. Chris, I want you to have us, for you to tell us a story too that we talked about before the program started, something about Francis the cannibal. Would you tell us what this is all about?
This was the night before Andy's birthday, and every night they serve us wonderful food, and then after dinner we have entertainment. And tonight just happened to be that this Francis man, who is 86, 90 some years old, had come up from his village, and his villagers played some bamboo flutes, and they danced around and performed their rituals for us. And afterwards we got to meet Francis, who is a headhunter. He, at age 10 or so, was attempting to win the favor of his tribe and went out and hunted heads. He apparently got 8 in his short career, and he quit about age 20, but he's a small man about up to my shoulder, and it was just amazing to shake hands with some guy who had taken lives willingly, and that was perfectly acceptable in their culture.
I'm sure you're relieved he had retired from that business.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Mary Lou Reed.
Well, parents, do you have any comparable stories? You have to keep up with the kids here. They're pretty good storytellers.
No, I would not say that I particularly had any stories, but I would say that one of the experiences we had in visiting a country like this was the comfort level for us of how do we visit people and not feel that we're exploiting them and the land itself and the whole political system, really. And as the boys described, visiting a lodge, this lodge is only accessible by air or up the Sepik River and then up the Karawari River, so that we pondered as we were there how the native people feel about us and what is this doing to their lifestyle and their whole cultural history. And it comforted us, I think, to discover that the clan system is still very important, and the village that comes to provide a musical entertainment, or they were doing some dances, is in fact paid by the lodge as a way to say, we think your skills are important and have value, and you don't necessarily need to leave the village to go and earn money another way. Really, you don't need that much money in a village. The food is easily and readily grown. The fish in the river are very accessible. And so the reason they need money seemed to be primarily to buy gasoline for the Yamaha motors that are attached to the back of the hollowed-out log canoes. But I felt that the government was making an effort, and by paying the people was a way to say this is good. No individual entertainer received the money. It went back to the village. The village voted on how to choose to disperse the money, either for medical supplies or supplies that they needed in terms of tinned fish was one of the foods that they used in different areas where they couldn't get to the live fish.
Well, Steve, would you describe a little bit further how primitive, in a very positive way, use of primitive, this society is? We were talking about the hunter-gatherer level that they are still on, the fact they have no possessions, and that possessions don't seem to be important.
This slough was the least developed place that we've ever had a chance to visit. I think we all kind of categorically talk about third world countries, and my vision of third world countries from those we've visited are places where Western kinds of standards have been imposed, and what we call poverty appears to be the case, because these countries can't afford our kinds of wants, although they see through the media Miami Vice and American television and so forth. In New Guinea, why they're trying to make the leap from no Western influence at all, or moderate influence, if you will, to 1989 in the course of perhaps 3 or 4 generations, 3 generations. And that's an enormous leap. We didn't see what I would call poverty anywhere in New Guinea. Now, we were not in the biggest city, in the urban part of the city, and I understand the conditions there are not very good. But in the highlands, and then down on the Sepik and Karawari rivers, the tribes people were basic hunter and gatherer type folks. No Western style tools. The only purchased product that we saw was, as Judy said, a Yamaha outboard motor bolted onto the back of a great, huge, long, burned out log canoe. Most of the transportation on the river is by canoe with a paddle. There's some wonderful photographs of families paddling along in the river. Very few purchased goods at all.
And these are all individual tribes. You mentioned the 700 languages, yes. So they are not necessarily, they're coming into the 20th century in addition to coming into some sort of relationship with each other. The
and
development.
That's a difficult one. Their heritage is one of the clan is the nucleus of their world, and there was no need to go beyond that. The clan was self-sustaining. The big man is the term to describe the chief or the leader of the tribe. And the only encounter with a tribe nearby was to squabble, and that was usually using bow and arrow. That is still the case. We talked to one of our drivers who said, yes, he'd been in a bow and arrow battle within the last 6 months because the prized possession in New Guinea, a pig, had in fact strayed from where it's supposed to be into someone else's garden, and that is just a sin, and there was a battle over that retribution that goes on. So once the clan is that nucleus, and there's been little contact either through language. If there aren't roads, there's really little other encounter. They're struggling to get electricity to villages. Where we were, there is not electricity. And in fact, as we pondered what is the Western world bringing to this country, I'm not so sure that it's all advantageous to have been brought into the 20th century. Their lifestyle and their ability to get along may be better the way it is.
So they're definitely in culture shock.
Oh my goodness, yes, Lou. How can a driver drive us in a car and wear a watch and go home at night and literally take off his shoes because it would not either be comfortable or proper, and stroll down a little muddy path through a gateway into a home that has a campfire and is literally a grass hut, and then the next morning re-enter another?
I don't know
back and
how,
forth.
Lou,
Yes, Lou.
people came up with the clean shirt and clean pants every day, because the living conditions are simply different, and I don't call them either poor or primitive. They're just different. The temperature is the same all the time.
You don't need clothes.
You
They
don't.
have. We laughed about the wardrobe be wonderful because you choose the leaf you want that day, and in fact, a bunch of leaves is what you need, both for the men and women. The lap or a skirt sort of thing is what is worn. And body decoration beyond that is the paints and the native materials. And so having clothes is a nuisance. How do you maintain them? Somebody has to go down the river and wash them. Well, that's a nuisance.
And so some people wear Western dress, particularly the kids who have gone to missionary schools. But for the most part, that's not the case. And there's no need.
Shoes are a nuisance.
You've indicated that the weather is about the same all the time. What is the temperature range, and it's such a plush area, I assume it rains a lot?
Very lush. Rains in the afternoons, most every afternoon. The lowlands area on the edges, the coastal area here and on this side are very flat, sea level, and warm and high humidity. That's the crocodile territory and mosquitoes and malaria. Into the mountains at the 7,000 foot level, it's cooler. You would need a sweater. The native folks seem to, well, you're at the equator, so it's light at 6 in the morning, then dark by 6 at night, and they seem to be inside after dark, and it's warm enough with a little campfire over which they cook and by which they sleep. Men sleep in one house. I'm not sure what the correct title would be. I don't want it to be derogatory. It's a very effective, rain-proof home. The women sleep in another one. Their children stay with the women. It is a interesting, different style of family.
It's a matriarchal kind of a culture, and the men that we spoke to, we asked, as we talked about cultural things, what is your role in this society? And uniformly they said to fight. That the women do the farming, raise the children,
Build the houses.
Keep the houses tidy, and the role of the man is to fight. And we asked about this fighting, and they do have, by our terms, pretty civilized ways to fight. They fight with bows and arrows. They don't shoot each other with high-powered rifles.
They quit when it rains?
And when it rains, they call off the battle. And there's an agreement that they'll fight with another tribe next Tuesday, and then they get out and throw spears and shoot arrows at each other, and occasionally someone is killed. And the process just perpetuates itself, because when someone is killed, the other tribe feels the need for retribution, and so they schedule another round.
Then the culture shock comes along when the students who go to the university, and there's a university at Leh on the northern coastline here, leave these very rural areas, and now they're adjusting to the university situation. And apparently, as faculty members told us, in fact, take their bows and arrows with them, and in their dorm room are the books that they're studying from, and the bow and arrow and the paraphernalia from the clan they've left. And if they were to travel within the country, they would not use public facilities in terms of hotels, and there are very few. It's who you know in a clan and the next clan over, and you stay with somebody. And as a tourist, there are not very many places that you can pop in and stay overnight. There are no B&Bs in New Guinea. You need to stay at one of the 2 or 3 lodges that are there. They're just not the place.
In all of the highland countries, there's only 3 places for Western tourists to stay. And so there are only 10,000 tourists in New Guinea last year. So tourist travel is very light.
You were one of the rare tourists as far as that. I want to ask Chris and Andy another question, then I'll go back to Mary Lou. I know that you probably had interest in meeting some of the young people your own age, and I guess I have a question on that, and I have one for Chris with his journal. But did you meet young people, and did you talk to them about their life and compare it with your own?
Well, we didn't get to meet very many because, you know, it's kind of tough. We would see a village for a little while in one day and then go back to the place we were staying or go drive around some more. But I was sitting in the airport waiting one time in Port Moresby, and some fellows came up and we were talking, and they said they were very interested in us as being Americans especially, and they liked the Australians and the Americans being their friends because they view both as great big powerful people. But they also understand that their own culture is important, and they said that to me, and I didn't prompt them or anything like that, but they were very interested in how I lived my life and compared to them and what they had seen.
What is something, Andy, they told you about their own life that sticks in your mind as important and different?
Well, all of them, there were 3 of them, and they each come from a separate village, and they'd grown up in the jungle with no roads, no telephone, no TV, no power or anything, and then they'd come to the city to get a job or to get out of the jungle, and they were there now, and I'm not sure why or what they were doing.
Did you talk, Andy, about music, popular music? I know that.
No.
They didn't ask about Western entertainment figures?
We didn't talk about it.
Chris, you have your journal with you, and I think that's really smart when you're on these trips. You'll have something that you can remember and go back to. I know there's just all kind of notes in there, but from what you have put in your journal, what is something that sticks out in your mind as so impressive? I guess I should go back and say, I assume every day you wrote what the events and activities were, but what was most impressive to you?
Well, mainly, I mean, the unspoiledness of this backcountry highlands. There were the lodges and the tour facilities and the cars and drivers and everything like that. But beyond that, there was just the lack of modern technology back there, and I don't know if it was ignorance or apathy that people did not have the access to it and did not seem to really care. They were happy the way they were, and the ambitious ones ventured into the cities, and the ones who didn't, I mean, they didn't care and they stayed where they were. They seemed to be happy living as they were.
Thank you. Mary Lou Reed.
Well, could we go back a little bit? I'm very fascinated by this whole process of the role of the man is to fight. And yet you're describing what appears to be a fairly nonviolent culture in which everybody is fairly content, or has been in the past until the intrusion of the modern world. Did you have a sense that this was a sort of a ritualistic fighting? Were they defending their territory, or has this been a pattern that has evolved that is sort of served to keep the population down so that they don't overuse the resources? Did you pick up on the meaning behind the fighting?
That's a good question, and perhaps Judy has a view too. But my sense, Lou, from the people that I spoke to, that it was an ego, machismo kind of a satisfaction sort of thing. That was the role of the male.
Of them.
It was expected, and there was self-worth in performing that expected role.
Even though it might not be individual, be for the pride of the clan. This was
the pride of the clan, and I think individual honor in terms of defending your own turf or your clan's territory. If the neighbor's pig got onto your ground and the neighbor was unwilling to pay for the crops that the pig destroyed, then it was expected that you would do something about that. You wouldn't just turn the other cheek, so to speak. And that was important. You know, in this country there is the large-scale game of accumulating possessions here and in Western Europe, and that's not the case in New Guinea at all. In fact, they were baffled by how Western travelers could afford all the things that we apparently had. I read a story where the native people talked about a money machine. They believed that money came from a machine, and when you ran out, that Americans or Europeans or the Japanese simply went to the machine and got some more. The whole idea of producing value as a social pattern, like we do in the Western world, is a strange sort of a thing there. There, the notion of accumulating wealth is not the norm. that they eat what comes from the land and
Wear what comes from the land.
wear what comes from the land, and rains every day, the sun comes up every day, and it's a simple life.
And yet they are a nation, and so they're, I assume, developing gradually some sort of set of laws. And will these laws be then in conflict with their traditional patterns of fighting and killing? Is there a way for? Clearly, there's all these problems.
Yep, and I think you've identified what looked to us to be like some of the toughest is even the distribution of the ideas through how many languages, and then Pidgin English is kind of the universal one that's used in Parliament. And the clan that has the leaders in the role of leadership in the government then kind of expect, well, don't forget to look after your clan. And so asking government officials to, well, look, it's the same as the United States. Here we are again. We need to look at the pork barrels, whether they're pork barrels in New Guinea or in the States. I just see that as an ongoing issue, and no real clear answers for that, Lou.
And no signs of any help or assistance, direction from the United Nations? Are there ways in which this
the institution of the church?
Buffered?
The institution of the church would probably be one that has worked with, and it was Francis said he had been redirected in his headhunting efforts because the church missionaries had come and said that's not a good way to do it anymore. The church is working with education in the small villages and saying we want to change. You don't have to have retribution in the same way of killing somebody because somebody else was killed. That message is being distributed, but in a country like this, it is very unevenly distributed, and so the backcountry area is still maintaining the old way.
I want to pursue, we don't have much time again, but the issue of religion for just a little bit longer. How long has the church, are you speaking of the Catholic Church?
Primarily the Catholic, and also the fundamentalists now our church is very active.
How long has the church been that influential, and or am I overstating their influence? How much impact are they making on the society?
Hard for us to tell. Where we were in the lodge that we had to fly into because there are no roads, we were astonished as we rowed the boat up the river to see the little mission school, and in fact we could hear the voices singing in the morning. It is a lovely sound. They were singing some Christian songs and also their national anthem. So, and then we visited a school in that fishing Emus 2 village. Didn't that have a school? Was that a church school or a government school?
I think it was a government school.
With that, I have to bring the program to conclusion. We just get started. I would love to continue this. Again, as Mary Lou has said, it's been very special to have the whole family for the very first time. But I do have to say in closing to Andy that there's an advantage keeping the show going for many years because we had Andy on here when he was like 5 or 6 years old with some other children for our Christmas program. And Andy, we welcome you back after a decade or more on our program. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you've enjoyed our program with the Mayer family and our discussion on New Guinea. I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.